I got a text from Brianna, who is in Texas. How is the family in Israel? Because she wanted to know about how our family was that lives in Israel. Now, I'm pretty sure, Phil, you didn't get that text, and I'm pretty sure Tracy didn't get that text, but it did lead to some conversation. My point being is, I was happy she contacted me from a familial standpoint so we could have that conversation. And I think it goes back to where people go to get information, go get news and knowledge and have these conversations. Okay, I'm done. That's as far as my brain can handle.
Welcome to Peter and Phil's Courageous Conversations, a podcast addressing race relations and social issues in hopes that you'll be inspired to do the same. Now, let's begin our conversation with your hosts, Dr. Peter Weinstein and Dr. Philip Nelson.
All right. Welcome back, my friends. Appreciate everybody who listens in. Phil, good to see you. Thank you, Nicole, for keeping us on task. And thank you to Nationwide for allowing us to have these courageous conversations. We continue our conversation with Tracy Dowdy. And the last conversation kind of ended with how do we as a family, how do we as parents, how do we as influencers and leaders have conversations? And I put the discussion about Thanksgiving on the table, because Thanksgiving used to be a time when the family came together, or you got everybody together, and sometimes the kids were in the basement when you lived in a community like New York that had basements, and sometimes everybody was on different floors in the same house if you're in California, which has no basements. But how do we have these conversations now? How do we talk about current events in our households right now? Because Ukraine is at 600 days or something like that. The current government of the United States in Washington is a bit askew, for lack of a better way to put it. And Israel is under, from all around, and also from a political standpoint, nationally and internationally. So how do we have courageous conversations with our families at this day and age when we're not always sure where they're getting their knowledge and information from? So although I asked the question rhetorically before, I think I'm going to ask it seriously now, which is, Tracy, when you bring your family together, how do your conversations go?
Well, usually, I would say that most of the members of my family look at the world from a biblical worldview. And so I believe there's one truth, there's God's truth. And so my source of truth comes from God's word. And so that's first and foremost. I think everybody that's listening to this podcast, and whether you believe that or not, that's where I get my truth from. That's where my source of truth comes from. And so, I've been to Israel. I went to Israel in December of 2019. And actually, we have a joint colleague two colleagues that helped my husband and I. We renewed our wedding vows in Israel and Old Jerusalem at Christ Church and the Old Jewish Quarter. And we spent 2 weeks in Israel. And one of our colleagues introduced me to his Israeli family. And when my husband and I went to have dinner with this man in near Galilee, I just assumed he was a Messianic Jew. He was actually a Christian Arab. His name was Salim, and my husband and I were so blessed by him and his daughter and the time that we spent with them. And we've been in communication ever since. And his ministry is where he tries to bridge Arab Christians with the Jewish people and the Muslim people. And it's just an extremely difficult and challenging role that he and his ministry play. But it really opened my eyes to the fact that Israel is not just made up of Jewish people. It's a melting pot of religious people, and there are many parties represented. So I go back to scripture. I think one of the most important scriptures that I think brings us to, I think is an answer to most of this, is in 2 Chronicles 7:14, where it says, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and I will forgive their sin and heal their land. You know, we are in a time and a season where there's a lot of hatred. Where does hatred come from? I mean, it's just evil what Hamas has done. And, you know, their ultimate goal is to annihilate the Jewish people and to annihilate American people. And I feel I have a lot of empathy for the Palestinians who are living on the Gaza Strip and who are in, you know, unfortunately being, you know, they're somewhat innocent in all of this, and it's terrible, and it's a very critical time in that region in the world. But you've got Israel, this tiny little piece of land, and it's completely covered by the enemy. They want to annihilate this land of people, and they always have for many thousands of years. And it's really a miracle, I think, that Israel has been a sovereign nation for as long as it has. And so I hope that answers your question.
Well, I want to add I just want to do a sequel to it if I could. I haven't been in touch with your kids in a while. I met one of them through Vet Partners in the past. Not understanding or knowing their religious beliefs, they may or may not be parallel to where you are, but if they're not, these conversations, you still kind of have them, your basis is based upon your religion. They may approach it from a political standpoint more so. I'm just curious how those conversations go when you're sitting at the Thanksgiving table and not everybody is approaching them from the same foundation.
Well, how do you approach it? Let me turn that back on you.
Well, no, I mean, my kids are unfortunately or fortunately have followed a lot of my. I've in many cases, and I think my parents did the same thing. They have influenced my approach to things. So I have influenced my kids. What I heard at the dinner table influenced me, and what my kids heard at the dinner table has influenced them. So when we have conversations about the events of the day, we all tend to be a very common agreement from that standpoint. So my question really is do your kids come at it from the same fashion because of the way they've been raised in your household?
Yes.
Okay. So basically, the conversations become relatively easy when everybody is in agreement, but it always gets interesting when you bring in outsiders to the family, friends, family, etc., that maybe haven't been raised the same way. And that has nothing to do with Thanksgiving dinner, but it's always interesting for a courageous conversation. My wife is not Jewish. And so she has got her foundational basis from some of the conversations that we have, and she's become very knowledgeable about Israel and the issues that are there. My daughter's boyfriend is not Jewish, and he's probably been learning more about Judaism from that standpoint. So it's very interesting. And Tracy, you bring a very unique perspective of having been to Israel and having been renewing your vows there and getting a feeling for the challenges that the Israeli people have in living in the Middle East, being surrounded by a bunch of enemies, for lack of a better way to put it. So I think these conversations really is how do we have these conversations with our kids now that our kids are a little bit more mature, and what happens when they bring a different approach to the table? So to me, again, it's all about how do we have these conversations? I'm sure Phil is chomping at the bit.
No, my experience is totally different. However, I have noticed that my children, I am always amazed at, although I recognize the influence I may have had on them and on their positions, they bring a different perspective to the position, to our discussions when we have a family discussion. And it's usually a robust discussion, and they take it down different roads that I didn't expect. And I find myself fighting, being pulled down those roads. Or I may think that, I noticed the generational differences very astutely. I notice that many of my positions are based on my upbringing and based on my experiences. And they may begin with a position, they may be close to my position, but they are much more expansive in their application of that position. And I realize that, and I have to, and I sit back and think about the differences in their experiences and mine. And the best way I can highlight this is that I grew up in a segregated society. I grew up in segregated schools. As much as Tracy wishes we didn't focus on race in schools because of the detrimental factor it has on education, we focused on race all the time when I grew up. It was constantly in my face. There were schools I could not walk into that I wondered what the walls looked like. And it was only because of my race. And I remember one day when my youngest child had his 11th birthday, and I came home and my home was torn up because all of the TVs had been disconnected and connected together so that everybody who was attending his birthday party could play a computer game on all the TVs. And I also noticed that all of his friends were white. And then 20 years later, I realized how that experience opened his eyes to different issues, to the same issues that I had particular positions about, and how his experiences influenced his analysis of those issues. And so I'm able to see generational differences and realize that I am not as influential on my kids as I wish I were, or maybe I don't. Maybe I'm glad that they're able to assimilate a little better. And maybe I'm glad that they don't have to forgive and forget, or forgive and accommodate.
My kids are in their 20s. And again, my kids were definitely raised. First of all, they were raised in two households because I was divorced. And second of all, we had very similar beliefs politically. Tracy, if you heard some of the podcasts, I mean, I was raised in a very liberal background in the 70s during the Vietnam War. So that came with its own series of conversations at the dinner table. And I think the tendency was to raise my kids in the same way. And when we would go visit their grandparents, whether they were in Chicago or New York, with my parents in New York, we always talked politics there, but it was always on the more liberal side of things. So they were raised in a Jewish liberal household in a purple county in California. So they were raised in a very diverse political environment and people environment, because where we live in Irvine, my kids' friends came from Japan, Korea, the Philippines. They were mixed marriages. There were Hispanics. So there was a tremendous diversity compared to, Phil grew up in a segregated school system. I grew up in a somewhat segregated school system because 85% of my high school classmates were Jewish. So I had my own biases that I was exposed to. And so that's where a lot of this goes back to the discussion of perspectives. How you're raised, the influences that you have while you're growing up, they're not easy to get rid of. And so you tend to carry them in your future perspectives. And you add information and knowledge over time that help you in your conversations and in your decision making. And I would have to suggest, Tracy, you've told your story that a lot of what you've gone through is influenced your decision making and your conversations in 2023?
Yes. Well, I'm curious, as a Jewish man, how do you feel about all of the protests that have been breaking out across the world, suggesting ceasefire of the Palestinians, and a lot of what seems to be concern for the Palestinians? I don't know. What's your perspective of what that means to the Jewish people?
Anti-Semitism is running rampant. It's worse now than it's ever been. What I'm seeing in the news, what I'm hearing from university deans or presidents, what I'm reading is quite scary, because, and let me, again, I'm going to go back and separate Hamas from the Hamas from the Palestinians. The Palestinians have been a victim, as have the Israeli Jews, for thousands of years. But their goal in life is not to eliminate the entire Jewish population. In many cases, I believe their desire is to live in some sort of peaceful fashion, if that could ever come about. But I think the comments that are happening and the pro-Palestinian marches that are out there don't understand the history. They don't understand what's going on, and they don't understand the challenges that the Israeli people have faced since 1948, and even for thousands of years prior. And so again, somebody is influencing the decision-making, the protesters, the messaging that's going on. And it concerns me that we've got leaders in different levels, whether it's the universities, whether it is in communities, that are allowing these protests to go about. Now, granted, I'm all about freedom of speech, but I'm all about making sure that that freedom is not going to be deleterious to individuals when possible. So what's going on in terms of the anti-Israel, pro-Palestinian, and I would suggest in many cases the protesters are not separating out Hamas from the Palestinians, the pro-Hamas, is extremely scary, because there's a lot of people out there who have that approach and feeling.
Yeah. Do you think any of those people are Republicans or conservatives?
I think that the people who are protesting bridge all political parties. I don't think that is a political, I don't think that's a conservative or liberal. I think that is just a belief that individuals have.
I see.
I believe there's some people on the left and some people on the right that, and if you were to go through, you would not see one. You couldn't tell their political position by looking at them. You know that you only know their political position regarding Palestine, not their political position regarding the U.S. Democrat or Republican side of things. That's my thoughts.
Yeah.
So Tracy, was your question about in America, or in terms of whether they were conservative Republicans or not?
Yes, in America, the protesters that are protesting pro-Palestine and Hamas, are they, what's their political leaning? That's all I was asking, like where they're getting their
where they're getting that message from.
Mm-hmm. And it's causing, I'm just curious, like where do they stand on the
yeah, and I'm not so sure that all of it is, well, the anti-Semitic protest, the outwardly anti-Semitic protests is one thing. The pro-Palestinian protests, I think, are a mixture, and I think that's even more difficult to demographically define.
I'm not aware. I mean, I just don't know enough about it to comment. But one of the things I will say is that, 30% of the Bible is prophecy. And many of these prophecies have, the Old Testament prophesies of the coming of Jesus or Yeshua, a Messiah, and Yeshua fulfilled 55 of the, I think all of the prophecies regarding his coming, and dying on the cross for our sins for salvation. I believe it's 55. It might be somewhere between 55 and 75. I don't remember the exact number, but he fulfilled all of those. And then you go into, many prophecies that are in Daniel, Ezekiel, and in Revelation about this big war that will take place in Israel that will involve the northern states. And so Iran, Russia, Jordan, Syria. I mean, these are things that, it seems like it's lining up, that it could be lining up to, something much bigger. And so it wouldn't shock me if things led to that. It wouldn't be a surprise to me.
I think anybody who knows anything about Christian prophecies are concerned about that. But then that was raised during the 6-Day War too.
Correct. Yeah.
I mean, that same discussion was held even then. It was also held during the war that established Israel. The same prophetic concerns were raised then too. And it just goes to show you the frailty of human vision. But at least there are some of us who are wary of that, right?
It also shows how strong the Jewish people are when it comes down to protecting, because they have been able to deal with this on all fronts. I mean, they are surrounded at every border by people who do not like them, who would like to basically take and make them their homeland instead of the Jewish homeland. And so what Hamas is doing in Gaza and Hezbollah is mounting in Lebanon, and we'll see what happens, from Jordan and Syria. They fought them off before. They are probably the best prepared military, except for 2 weeks ago, the best prepared military in the world when it comes down to this, but they're a really small country with only a handful of people.
I don't mean, all I can say is not without help.
Right. No, and we can get into discussion of politics in terms of how do we continue to fund the Ukraine? How do we continue to fund Israel?
Oh, no, I wasn't even trying to introduce that. I was just saying.
No, but, if the United States, who needs to help Israel, can't make those decisions because we don't have a political system that's functional right now, it makes me very uncomfortable. Let me just put it that way.
I haven't heard a large voice against supporting Israel in governmental circles.
Except we don't have a House of Representatives who can move forward.
Well, that has nothing to do with the voice that I didn't hear. And
yeah.
and even then, the voice that I'm hearing is about Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
This is totally, again, I don't want to conflate the issues. Our political structure is a mess in the House. Let's just make it simple. But in terms of the support for the various needs, Israel seems to be, support of Israel seems to be a large consensus in the U.S. and among legislators, despite the protests that we're seeing.
So, Tracy, I think we're getting close to wanting to wrap up here, and I just want to give you a chance to see if there's anything you haven't had a chance to bring to the table, any thoughts or ideas you want to share with us, and just any final words. You won't have the final word, I'll promise you that, because Phil's here. But but just anything you'd like to bring to the table.
Well, I just want to circle back around and say that this unwritten rule of not talking about religion and politics in the workplace is now, I'm out of the closet. Okay. And I love it. I'm very happy that I was able to come out and just make my position clear, because I know I represent a lot of people. And so hopefully by me having the courage and the boldness to, talk to you guys and share my faith and my biblical worldview and my position as a Christian conservative that's grown up in the South. I don't want to be stereotyped, just like you guys don't want to be stereotyped. I want others to be able to come to the table and have these courageous conversations with you guys, and hopefully it'll spearhead others. And I'm glad to know there you've already had half a dozen others on your podcast to have these conversations, and hopefully it's going to allow us to people to be bold and realize that we're more on the same page and we're more aligned with each other than not.
No, I appreciate that. And hopefully, having heard a little bit more about where we came from and our perspectives, the different ideas, that you have a better understanding of where we were coming from at Vet Partners last year, and which really kind of spearheaded this conversation. And as I always do, I will turn to Dr. Nelson to have the final word.
First of all, Tracy, I want to thank you for coming. I really do. I've enjoyed this extended conversation. I hope you don't think we're as foreign as you thought when you first started. I do appreciate the honest exchange of ideas and approaches and philosophies. And I want to repeat how much I respect and honor you. I think our goal should be that you don't have to be bold in order to speak your mind. And that should be a tenet of a democracy, of a true democracy, because we're never going to come up with a consensus until we truly are able to express our individual opinions. And that is the purpose for this conversation. We like to make it homey by saying that it's two neighbors talking across the fence. And in this particular case, it's a Zoom fence. But what it really is a true exchange, honest exchange of opinions without recriminations, and an opportunity for everybody who participates in the conversation to grow. I have grown as a result of our conversation, and I want to thank you for allowing me to grow. I want to thank all of our listeners for listening to us as we grew, and we hope you had a chance to grow too. And we hope you extend this conversation. We want to thank Nationwide for supporting our efforts, for having the boldness to support our efforts. And we want to thank Nicole, our producer, for taking this and making something cogent out of it.
Hey, Phil, you know what time it is?
I think it's peanut butter. For you, it's peanut butter and jelly. For me, it's peanut butter and molasses. So
Doris must be still out of town.
She is, yeah, unfortunately.
I like peanut butter, banana, and honey.
There you go.
See, there you go.
Thank you for joining us for another courageous conversation. Be sure to follow us and check back next week for more.